Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're diving into a deeply harrowing literary reconstruction of a true story, drawn straight from the Punjab counterinsurgency. The source material we're analyzing is called I Am Anokh Singh, and it was published by the Death Certificate Project. It's this incredibly gripping piece of forensic documentation. It attempts to reconstruct a life, and ultimately a death, by piecing together community testimony, family accounts, and honestly, a stark, glaring lack of official state records. So let's just get right into the heart of it.
So how exactly does the state erase a person? It's a pretty chilling thought, right? Well, this explainer is fundamentally a forensic investigation into exactly that question. We're going to explore what actually happens when official records completely vanish into thin air, and how a community steps up to preserve memory when the state machinery absolutely fails to produce a paper trail. All right, let's start with Section 1, the missing death certificates, and look at the broader context of Punjab's counterinsurgency. To really grasp what's going on in this story, we have to zoom out and look at the macro-level context. The source text grounds its entire analysis in systemic human rights allegations made against the state during this era, a period that was heavily investigated by the Death Certificate Project. Now, the source outlines two very competing narratives. On one hand, you have the official history. This is the state's narrative of law and order being restored, terrorism being defeated, and total administrative success. But then you have this other history. This is the history documented by human rights defenders like Joga Singh, who extensively investigated mass illegal cremations and the disappearances of individuals that the state simply labeled as unidentified. The text we're analyzing today firmly places its subject right inside this second narrative. Moving on to Section 2, the Golak Inspector, Integrity Before the Altar.
So, our central subject here is Bhai Anokh Singh Babbar, and the source frames him not just as a historical figure, but as a man of unyielding, almost incredible personal discipline. We see this specifically through the concepts of the Golak, which is the Sikh community donation box, and Das Fund, the strict practice of giving 10% of your earnings to the guru. You see, Anokh Singh was actually an inspector for the SGPC, meaning he managed these exact community funds, and the text shares this really striking detail about his integrity. Apparently, when visiting his own newborn nephew, he refused to gift even 2 rupees from his pocket, purely because that money belonged to the Panth, the community. He literally feared the misuse of community funds more than anything else.
The source maps out a pretty clear timeline of how he was radicalized and pushed into the underground movement. It starts back in 1978, noting his presence at the Vaisakhi massacre, where 13 Sikhs were killed without any subsequent legal convictions. Then we hit the immense turning point. He was actually inside the Harmandir Sahib complex during the military assault in June of 1984. Finally, we arrive at August 1987, and his final arrest wasn't in some dramatic, cinematic battle. According to the text, he was literally just riding a bicycle when he was apprehended by the police. Which brings us to Section 3, 10 Days at Vairovaal, the testimony of the body and the soul. Now, the source material moves into some incredibly intense and harrowing territory. 10 days. The text places this stark number right at the center of its narrative to emphasize the duration of the alleged torture at the Vairovaal Police Station. The text neutrally reports some truly severe physical claims drawn from community memory. We're talking about things like a broken hip, inserted heated metal rods, and even the removal of his eyes with a bayonet. But the text directly juxtaposes this physical destruction with a really powerful claim of spiritual endurance. The claim is that through it all, Anokh Singh never stopped his continuous spiritual recitation of the Naam. No names given, no confessions signed, and no cries of pain. The psychological impact of all this was apparently huge. According to the reconstructed account, while lying there physically broken, Anokh Singh began to recite the evening prayer, Rahas, in a really sweet voice. And the text claims that a sentry who was listening was so deeply moved by this that he surrendered his rifle to the station head and quit on the spot, allegedly saying, "I cannot do this job that forces people to kill saints. I cannot." On the flip side, the source records the accused senior police officer, SSB Mohammad Izhar Alam, reacting with absolute disbelief, reportedly calling them magicians. The author of our source text points out that this officer basically mistook Anokh Singh's deeply practiced spiritual endurance for magic. It suggests the state machinery simply couldn't process, let alone defeat, a discipline that was forged by a lifetime of prayer and integrity. All right, let's look at Section 4, the Kara and the Ashes, and the denial of final rights.
So, after his death in custody on August 30th, 1987, the focus really shifts to how the state handled the evidence. We need to talk about the Kara.
It's the iron bangle worn by Sikhs, a circular symbol of unbroken discipline and identity. According to the family's account as presented in the text, they weren't notified of Anokh Singh's death while there was still a body to identify. Instead, they were only informed after his body had already been secretly cremated at Tarn Taran. The source highlights the profound spiritual and legal injury this caused, basically denying the family a post-mortem, an inquest, or even the ability to perform final rites.
So the return of this one single iron bangle to the family was literally the only tangible evidence left behind, and the source makes a very powerful argument here. In the total absence of official paperwork, this Kara spoke volumes. It proved he existed, it proved he was in state custody, and it proved he died.
Finally, Section 5. The architecture of impunity. The systemic silence of the civil record.
If we zoom back out to examine the local civil administration, the source describes what it calls an architecture of impunity. It argues that civilian offices, specifically the deputy commissioner acting as district magistrate, allegedly completely failed in their legal duty to protect citizens and investigate unnatural deaths. To give you an idea of the scope of this, the text highlights a chilling detail. Following Anokh Singh's death, his father, Bhai Anokh Singh, was also allegedly abducted, tortured, and killed by the police. The source uses this to argue that the state wasn't just targeting individuals, it was sending a permanent message to entire families and villages.
Just look at this list of missing documents. No arrest record, no post-mortem, no inquest report, no death certificate, not even a cremation register entry. The author uses this absolute silence of the civil record to argue the existence of that architecture of impunity. The core claim here is that this wasn't just a clerical error or some lost paperwork. The complete lack of documentation was a deliberate feature of the system, designed to make killings disappear entirely.
The text wraps up with this really sharp contrast, the Kara on the table versus the officer in the chair. It neutrally but very firmly points out that while the family was left with immense grief and a completely empty file, officers who were implicated in these severe human rights abuses, like SSP Alum, were allegedly never investigated. Instead, they were promoted and even awarded high national honors, like the Padma Shri. And that leaves all of us with a really profound question to ponder. What actually happens when the official record is completely empty, and who ultimately is held accountable? This source material challenges our whole understanding of history when the paper trail vanishes, asking us to consider the lasting weight of missing files and how community memory has to step in when the state goes totally silent. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. I hope it gave you a completely new perspective on the power of documentation. Keep asking questions and keep exploring.